All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Mid-Hudson Special Ed Task Force's event on safe and accessible transportation. We have two presenters today. I'm going to let you guys present and share a little bit more on yourselves, and we will get started. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. My name's Fiona Rattray. I work at Putnam Independent Living Services. We serve families, well, in my position, I serve families with my colleague Denise Green across the 7 counties of the Lower Hudson Valley. I am also a parent of 2 children with disabilities, both of whom have had to use special transportation during their school careers. I'm going to pass you on to Jen to introduce herself.
Thank you, Fiona. My name is Jennifer O'Neill. I'm one of the special education advocates that work at Taconic Resources for Independence, and we are one of 41 independent living centers across New York State. We offer a number of services at our center. What I do is special education advocacy. I'm joined here tonight with a colleague, Patricia Lucio Penn, and we have another part-time advocate in our office. I'm also a parent of an individual with unique needs, and I have been doing this work for many years. I'm also a community organizer and an executive member of the Mid-Hudson Task Force. And thank you to Nancy and the other members for organizing this workshop tonight and allowing us to be here together. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this evening. So I'm just going to quickly flash up a quick description of the organizations that Jennifer and I work for. I'm not going to go into a big long description about it. You will receive a handout after this webinar, which will contain information from this session, some useful links, and also contact details for Jennifer and I at our offices. So let's move into the transportation section. And what we're going to look at today is we're going to do a general overview. We're going to look at some of the services and accommodations that can be provided in this context, talk about the importance of information sharing, some common concerns that can arise, and tips for parents. I'm now going to hand it over to Jen.
So the Committee on Special Education, the CSE, and committees on preschool are responsible for developing a student's IEP. And within that IEP, there's a section that pertains to special transportation, which is a related need. It's important to note that when the special transportation is required for a student, that the box just isn't checked, that there's actually specific information added about what type of special transportation needs a student requires. In that communication part of it, the IEP is developed, and that information goes from the CSE committee to the district's transportation office. And a lot of times we are not clear when we're working with school districts exactly how that's happening. So sometimes the IEP is sent over, sometimes summary of the IEPs are sent over to the district's transportation office. Sometimes it's handled through buildings and building principals and given to transportation staff. But it is very important as a parent that you understand what that process is. You want to make sure that they have the correct IEP for your student and that the information on it is specific.
So the underlying principle here is there should always be that to and fro communication between those offices, so that everybody is theoretically, everybody is on the same page about the transportation needs and how they need to be met. So least restrictive environment applies to transportation just as it does to the classroom. So most students with disabilities will receive the same transportation as students without disabilities. However, they may have transportation written into the IEP. There is a section for it, And those services are going to be determined by individual needs. So you could have an IEP and not need or require specialized transportation. You may have certain points in a student's school career where they need that transportation, and then later on maybe they don't. And it's important to be aware that even if a student is deemed high functioning, that doesn't mean that they don't need specialized transportation. A student may be high functioning but have sensory issues or anxiety issues or school attendance issues, all sorts of things that could mean that they are going to be needing that service as well. Does anyone want to add anything to that? I'll take it that's a no. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So the CPSE, CSE have to determine if the individual needs, if the individual needs of the student prevent them either from using the same transportation provided to students without disability or from getting to school in the same manner as students without disabilities. So as with everything in special education, it is down to the individual needs of the child and having proof and documentation of those needs. Jen.
So parents are always equal members of the Committee on Special Education. And it's really important when you come to the table to discuss all aspects of your child's IEP and program, that you understand that, and that includes transportation needs. And often when parents are at these meetings, it tends to be an area that's more glossed over than others. So you really need to take the opportunity to provide information about what your child may need. And that could be a doctor's note. And be prepared when you're in these meetings. And you can also ask if your child does have specialized transportation and something's not working out. You can ask for a member of transportation, a representative, to attend the CSE meetings. So it's really important to feel empowered and to make sure that you're able to share the needs of your child.
So if you have a child who's coming up to school age and you have some concerns, you want to be going into that CSE meeting ready to explain why you may be seeking specialized transportation, because it's not necessarily going to be something that comes up in the discussion. You need to have documentation. So for example, if you have a child that's particularly scared of loud noises like a car horn being honked, you need to be sharing that information with the CSE committee. Or equally, you may have a child who starts out fine on the bus and then develops issues. And again, we want to be documenting. So every time your child is getting off the bus or onto the bus and you are encountering problems, keep a record of that so that you can come into that meeting and represent your child on equal footing. I'll hand this over to you, Jen. So examples of transportation.
Can I add something? It's Renee.
Mm.
Can I add something? I think it's important for parents to also remember that just like you have to be mindful of forming relationships with the people that are working with your child in school, the actual beginning of the school day is when your child gets on that bus. So the bus driver, if your child has a monitor or an aide or a nurse or whatever, those are the people that you also want to form relationships with. So sharing information with them and including them with information, and vice versa, is very important. But again, the moment your child steps on that bus, that is the beginning of their school day. And then the end of it is when they get off that bus.
Very good point. Thanks, Renee. Okay, Jen, do you want to go through the needs?
So some examples of transportation needs: mobility, such as a wheelchair, walker, limited sight. Behavior, as Fiona just said, fear of noises, sensory overload, self-abusing type of behaviors, running away, crying. Again, examples of why specialized transportation may be needed. Communication, hard of hearing, nonverbal, difficulty understanding directions, and English language learner. Other examples might include a physical need for assistive device to maintain sitting position, difficulty navigating steps, and medical, seizures, fatigue, causing them to fall asleep, requiring oxygen, inhalers. And if there are significant medical issues, you may require some additional staff, such as a nurse.
And this is not an exhaustive list. There can be other needs as well, but these are the ones that we come across quite frequently, and these are the categories that we come across frequently. So the IEP must include specific transportation recommendations to address each of that student's needs. This is what Jen was referring to before. We don't just want the box to be checked to say that special transportation is needed. We need to know what the nature of the special transportation is going to be, in terms of what kind of bus, the arrangements for picking the child up, the equipment that may be needed, the accommodations that may be needed. Jen?
So special transportation goals. They're only required if there's some instruction and measurable goals that are going to be on that student's IEPs. And they could have to do with behavior, socialization during travel. But again, they have to be goal related, working towards a goal. And we could talk about this a little bit later, but it's important when you have students that are transitioning that there's travel training that could be a part. And that's all goal related.
So you can have special transportation as a related service without having goals. But if you do have any goals related to transportation, as Jen just said, they need to be related to increasing the child's independence or improving their behavior during travel. So now we're going to look at some of the services and accommodations that can be provided in the transportation context. So I'll do the first one, that's special seating considerations. These are a couple of examples. So some students may need to be seated away from the window. Maybe it's too distracting for them, or it's a comfort level thing, or maybe it's a safety thing. Some students need to be sitting by themselves and not adjacent to another student for a variety of reasons. Again, this could be physical, it could be behavioral. Some may need to be seated in the front of the bus. Perhaps they feel more secure being closer to the driver or being able to see ahead through that big window at the front of the bus. You may have children that need to be seated in the middle if they get transport sickness, motion sickness, then you may need to consider where they are on the bus, that they're not at the back or the front where they're maybe going to feel that movement a little bit more. Jen, personnel.
And this is where the staff and the personnel comes into play. A trained monitor, one-to-one nursing services, interpreters. All this is important and should be addressed within the student's program, IEP. So we often see where we have aides now, even on the bigger bus. But if your child requires a one-to-one aide, it needs to be documented on the IEP that is a required aid.
Thanks, Jen. And then there's equipment needs such as braces, car seat, walker, lap belt, manual or power wheelchair, safety vest, service animal, stroller, or an assistive technology device. Now, obviously, these all serve different needs. Some of them are going to be from a safety perspective. Some of them are the child needs these things to move about for mobility. Some of them may be to keep the child calm. Service animal, sorry, I need to make a distinction there, don't I? So service animal is an animal that is trained to support somebody with a disability, such as a guide dog for the blind, or an animal that's maybe trained to signal to someone who is deaf or hard of hearing when they need to, when something is going on. You also get service animals that can help people in, if they have difficulty with balance and stopping them from falling over. That is different to animals that are there just to provide support and comfort, and then they're deemed support animals. I don't know what the situation is with support animals on buses in school contexts. Do any of you know?
I think
not
they just
something
have
I've
to
come
be
across.
certified. I think they have to be a certified
So
service.
so this is Renee. So they're emotional support animals,
Mhm.
and it's not a service animal, which is very different.
Yeah.
But they do need a note from either a licensed, obviously, therapist or doctor stating the student's disability and the need for that.
Yeah.
In my advocating, I've not come across that. Definitely service dogs, but not that. The other thing I wanted to add to equipment needs, which I think is important, I think and that's why it's important to have the student and to bring it up at the meeting, is there are some students that really do need noise canceling headphones maybe, or to have earbuds or something like that, where they're soothed or calm with music, or they also have the ability to have some kind of, like it says, an assistive technology device, but now it's the iPads or something like that, because many students travel quite a distance to get to their program if they're in specialized bus transportation. And honestly, developmentally, to be on a bus for an hour and a half one way, and because that's the school that really meets your child's needs, they need some kind of sort of way to be entertained for that hour and a half. Think about it. So like in school, they might need breaks, right? They need certain kind of breaks. Well, that could be their break, that they're able to be engaged in that. The other thing for equipment needs, or I'm not sure if it's equipment or school that related to the bus, is many students need air conditioning. That too needs a note from the doctor. There are kids that might be allergic to, I know at this time of year is very prominent. It's really important if your child is allergic to bee stings or something like that, really, really important that the bus personnel know the protocol for what happens with that, that there's an EpiPen if need be on the bus, and all the people, the bus staff need to know about that and what to do. And I think you will be talking about the training, but those are just a few things that I know. Same thing with a child that might have diabetes. There again, all of this stuff, even if they have a one-on-one nurse or a personnel, it's really important that everyone have some kind of education and training about that particular device or protocol, because we're human and things happen.
Thanks, Renee. Vehicle needs, Jen?
Sure. So some vehicle needs may be a wheelchair ramp, a lift, a small bus, individual vehicles, medical equipment, such as an oxygen tank.
Yeah, because you can't just put an oxygen tank into any vehicle. There are safety implications. So it needs to be a vehicle that's designed, if you like, or there are protocols in place to help them and support them with the oxygen tanks. And the individual vehicle could be a sedan or it could be a minivan. So it really is dependent on, again, the needs of the student and what the district is providing. Okay, transportation personnel have a responsibility to provide a program, service, or accommodation or support. But when they have that responsibility, they have to be directly informed of that responsibility. And this is where that issue of communication really comes up, that we need to know that the information that we've all agreed in the CSE meeting is being conveyed to the transportation personnel. And parents do have the right to ask the CSE committee or the CPS committee or their respective school districts how this happens. How is the information conveyed? When is it conveyed? Is it generally conveyed at the beginning of the year? What's going to happen if you have a child that changes districts or, goes onto a new special education bus in the middle of the year? How is the information conveyed in that situation? So information sharing is absolutely key in this situation. So transportation personnel should be informed of any special, this is over and above any training they may get, any special information that might impact on the health and safety of the student transportation. And Jen's now going to take you through some of that information that needs sharing.
So, the reason that the student requires special transportation, as specific as possible, you should provide what reasons they are in need of the specialized transportation. Health needs, that might be an ongoing or an emergency intervention. And as Renee was just saying before, what do they do? If your child has an allergy, how would they access an EpiPen or some other type of medication that your child may need? Again, it has to be very specific and spelled out on that plan. Behavioral issues that might be, how do you address these behavioral issues? Do you have an FBA done? Are you working with a behavioral intervention plan? And if so, is the staff trained? Do they have that information? And are they prepared to implement that plan? Specialized training, again, for bus drivers and the attendants. We have some specialized training for individuals with autism. It's offered by Anderson, which is a center up here. Again, specialized training could be how to handle and use an EpiPen or some other device or medical equipment that they may need to help that student. The adult supervision, one-to-one bus attendant, a nurse, special monitoring and interpreting. So all those are important needs, and that information needs to be shared. And we cannot stress enough, it needs to be as specific as possible to meet the needs of the student.
We want to know that everybody's on the same page with this, that we're not, you know, we don't have a bus driver wondering why there's an interpreter on the bus. This should all be something that they've discussed and received training on before the child boards the bus.
And also on that note, if you have a temporary or fill-in, or if somebody's out sick, how is that information given to the fill-in, right? Or the sub, whether that be the bus driver or an aide. You want to know how that information is being shared.
So Jen, I'm going to jump in on that one
Yeah.
because I like to say vice versa on that. So with the behavioral issues or fears, I also think there are a number of students that I advocate for that have emotional needs. So they have high anxiety, that transition, different changes in a particular routine. So if some of the staff that are typically on that bus are not going to be there because they're going to be on vacation or they're sick, that how is the parent going to get a heads up to share with the student is very important. I've had bus drivers and monitors and, you know, have wonderful conversations with the kids themselves and saying and letting them know, you know, Miss Renee's not always going to be able to be on the bus because one day, you know, if I get sick, we're going to have a sub. Just so kids are getting used to that, that would be happening. Because that in and of itself has caused and created some behavioral outbursts. And it works both ways because it could be, you know, Miss Renee was on the bus in the morning, but in the afternoon ride home, she got sick and she couldn't be on the bus, so somebody else was there. So again, just giving a heads up. It's all about that communication and respect for everyone, including and most importantly that student, because I keep thinking about these young students or students that really do need to have a heads up. We don't want to create any more anxiety than needed.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I totally agree. And we talked about this a little bit in our morning session with my son's bus aide. All the years that he had special transportation, we shared our cell phone numbers, and if there was going to be a change, or if he was late, or I had him home, it's about being respectful and really having that connection, because they are the unsung heroes. And it really is a difficult job, and they're transporting the most precious cargo, which is your child. And to really develop that relationship, and to be able to share it. And we talked a little bit about calling and making sure that transportation knows you don't have a bus waiting outside, and just really being respectful of that communication. The last part here is the type of transportation: door-to-door pickup, and drop off. So that's another important factor. And again, if that's what's needed, it needs to be on the child's IEP or
We have one
student's
more.
IEP.
Can I be a
Oh.
bit specific with that?
Yes, Renee.
So, because, and here's the big thing. Because the committee decides that the door-to-door transportation needs to be on there, there's a little bit more involvement, and I think it's important for everyone to know this. So if you live on your own road, your own private, driveway or whatever like that, by law, and I think you do have it in the back here, you give a link to something about the New York State public pupil student transportation. By law, what happens sometimes is the transportation department, the head of transportation department, has one of their drivers go out to see if they can go up the driveway and turn around safely. That's the key word, safely. The other thing is, or it will have to be at the end of the driveway. The other thing is if you are renting from an apartment complex, this is a big one now, the same deal, that they have to be able to go in and out safely. And there has to be permission from the owners or the managers of that apartment complex, a note saying it's okay for them to come in and stop in front of the building to pick up a kid and all of that. These are technicalities that I've run into as an advocate, and I've called up to the and gotten this information and had to share it, because I'll say this, and I say this respectfully. A lot of new people are chairing meetings now, and they might not know the logistics. And if you don't have someone from transportation on your meeting or at your meeting, this holds up that transportation piece. And there are so many kids that really need door to door because they're an elopement risk. And if they can't get that, it's a danger to that child, and we want to protect that. And we don't want to prolong waiting for everyone to jump through the hoops to get that to happen. So again, always, when it comes to door, always check what needs to be written down.
Really
Thank
good
you.
point. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last bit that I thought was the last before, other accommodations: noise canceling earphones, fidgets, weighted vests, and personal electronics. We talked about that, right?
I'm sorry, I jumped the gun there. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. The more information, the better. The personal electronics are, yeah, a phone, an iPad, whatever it is, and it should definitely be noted on the IEP. I've worked with a family and student, and he had to have that map, the Google map, because one of his stressors and anxiety was not knowing where he was going or how long it would take to get there. So that was it. We had the district agree to add Wi-Fi, so he was able to use his hotspot, give him the hotspot, and he was able to use his iPad, and that was it. His behavior improved as soon as he saw that little car get going, and he knew he was, so many minutes away from school. All the anxiety lessened, and he is successfully riding the bus these days because of it. So it's important to have that. And when we are using personal devices and electronics, if you're using those and they're essential for the ride home or to the ride to school, you need to make sure those things are charged or you have some type of battery backup, because that can be a complete nightmare if you have a device that doesn't turn
Oh,
on.
yeah,
So just a note on
absolutely.
that.
Okay, we're going to go into common concerns with special education transportation here. I want to forewarn you that we can provide you with some information, but sometimes when we have complex situations, we can't necessarily give you the answers. It may be that it takes some negotiation and some experimentation, but let's go in and have a look at some of the concerns. So one is appropriate use of restraints. Some children are going to need seat belts, harnesses, etc. Some of them may need them for support. So it's a case of having the physical support so that they're sitting up straight. Some may need them for safety purposes. Staff need to be trained to ensure that they are used correctly. What we don't want to have is any seat belts, buckles, etc., that haven't been correctly locked into place, so that we don't have the risk of a child then undoing it. We want to make sure that they understand the best way to actually put the child into the harness or the seatbelt, so that we're not coercing limbs and maybe causing some pain or discomfort to the child. Do any of you have anything to add on restraints?
Yeah, I think it's important if there is the need for some specialized harness or belt, that that you really work with the school and the transportation department, because there are different types. And again, it's not a one size fits all. And if something isn't working, you make sure that it's addressed and that you're reaching out to the right people to help rectify that, and always involve your CSE, right? Your Committee on Special Education, because those plans are typically specific to what type of seatbelt or harness they may be using.
So, it's Renee, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I don't know if you addressed this morning or if this is the right time to talk about it, but sometimes kids have a behavior intervention plan in school, a BIP, that really makes no sense whatsoever on the bus, or they don't even have one at all, but their behavior on the bus is such that it kind of requires some a behaviorist to come in and do a functional behavioral assessment, see what this is, and then create a behavior intervention plan that's specific for the bus. That too can be done. Again, it's a committee decision. It requires that data, which is really important. And part of that is the communication with the people that are on the bus, as well as your child. But again, avoiding anything that makes it difficult for your child to be transported is really important, that because it's not just your child, it's other children as well. And that's why it's important. And again, some of these kids are on there for a long time.
Another thing I would point out is, if this is a new thing, your child going on the bus, or we're using a new type of seatbelt, safety seat, harness, etc., it's a good idea to have some time set aside to introduce your child to that. You don't really want their first experience of it to be first thing in the morning getting on the bus for the first time, because that is a recipe for a meltdown with a lot of children. Okay, excessive time spent on the bus. So this is a tricky one. In general, and we're talking about all students here, in New York State, students may not be transported more than 50 miles each way to and from school daily. However, if you have a child that is in a situation whereby maybe they're going through an area with heavy traffic, or there isn't a school or a program within 50 miles that meets their needs, sometimes children are going to be either traveling more than 50 miles a day, or they're going to be on the bus longer than we would like. Now, education law does not contain a maximum length of time that as people may be expected to be on a bus, but it's supposed to be reasonable. And that's where the problems may arise, because reasonable is supposed to be roughly 90 minutes, but clearly that is open to interpretation. Ladies, would you like to chip in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is important that parents do understand in a specialized program, it may be much longer on a bus, but in some of the districts here in Dutchess County, there's so many students on a bus and they're traveling far out into the county, especially at the secondary levels, that students can be on the bus for over an hour. And sometimes our students that are traveling to specialized programs outside of the county actually have shorter commutes than some of our in district students. So it's important to really understand what that travel time looks like. But it is important to note that whatever the travel time is, that it cannot be impacting the child's time receiving education. So that's really important, that they can't be leaving early or arriving late. So the time on the bus should be time outside of the curriculum and school day.
Well, that's a really good point. The other thing I wanted to add to that was that I think we're all very well aware of there is just such a need for bus drivers and bus aides, and it's hard. School districts are trying. I know they're trying their best. However, if it really is a big, huge problem for your child to be on the bus for that length of time, part of me wants to say to be as respectful and nice and say, what can we do to shorten this trip for my child? And brainstorm and have an informal meeting with maybe the chairperson from special ed as well as somebody from transportation to see how they can change stuff up. Like I had said, I had shared that many school districts, they have their own bus transportation department and their own buses and bus drivers they hire. But many of them, which is most of them, contract out. And I can't even imagine being the head of transportation for a big city school district where you're contracting with maybe 4 to 5 different bus companies and having to keep track of all of that. So the sooner that you can share information and again, back it up with justification as to why. I never say never, but I also don't promise anything. But if you don't ask, you have 0% chance. So that's
I'll throw
what I
something
want to
else.
say about that.
Yeah, I'll throw something else in here. It's a question of really understanding, having a thorough understanding of the child and the child's needs and the child's feelings as well. So whilst none of us would want to see a child on a bus for 80 miles a day or 100 minutes a day, it may not be your hill to die on, depending on who your child is and what they can cope with. So, for example, my children both decompressed on their bus journeys home. That was a downtime for them that they really needed after the hustle and bustle of the school day. If it was a question of having them in a program that didn't quite meet their needs versus an extra 5 minutes than I would like on the bus to be in the program that totally meets their needs, then that is something that I would want to consider. Similarly, as Renee was saying, talk to the districts. Maybe there can be an agreement whereby you intercept and you pick them up at one of the stops so that you can get them home a bit quicker. Always down to the individual needs of the child. Okay, and moving on, but basically, referring to what Renee and Jen were just saying, it is actually a violation of the Rehabilitation Act, which applies to all people with disabilities, to shorten a school day. That should never, ever happen to fit in with the transportation schedule. So if you are in that situation, then you should, you're in a position to do something about that, and because there's no ambiguity there. You cannot shorten a student's day to meet transportation needs. End of story. Driver training. So drivers and transportation staff do get mandatory training. All of them do for working with any students, but they do get additional instruction for working with special needs of students with disabilities as well. And they do get refresher training each year that includes refresher training on meeting special needs of students with disabilities. That doesn't mean you can't ask about it as a parent and find out what's going on. Also, we can't assume that that training is going to be all encompassing. So even though we know that they should be getting that training, we may need to be adding information about our children and making sure that they have all the necessary information to manage that journey with our children. Does anyone want to add anything on that?
It's Renee. So I had so for some of those students that, like you were saying, Fiona, and that was a humongously wonderful point to make, that pick and choose your battles. That if your child's going to be on the bus for a little longer because you're going to a program that your child's going to a program that is just absolutely wonderful and is going to meet your child's need, that's great. I have many students that I advocate for that do go to a program that's not close by. It's an hour away, maybe an hour and a half away, depending on where they live. And one of the things I learned this past year, which I was like so excited about, those bus drivers really don't come back to the school district and then go back again. They stay at that school for the entire day. So they're sitting there for the entire day. And I wouldn't want that job. But here's the thing. If you talk to the director of that school and there's specific training for certain kinds of things that they provide to their staff, or their staff gets training, like for example, this particular kid was about autism or about kids with epilepsy, that they had staff there that they went and they trained the bus drivers and the bus aides right at the school during the day. I was like, wow, was that amazing? Or I was like so excited about that. And that's what, and I felt so good because that's what it's about. It's about everybody, doing their best, and they were there. But it was neat that they were willing to do it, and they set it up, and they took the training, and these staff were able to ask questions where they that was specific to the kids on their bus. And that's what made all the difference. So just throwing that out there.
That's great to hear. Thank you for that. Okay, lack of school bus drivers, aides, monitors, etc. This is an ongoing issue. It really peaked in the wake of the pandemic. Since the pandemic, it continues to be an issue. So there's, not nationwide, statewide, there's still a 10% shortage of staff for transportation. And some districts, for example, Rochester, are often 20% short. So that's why we would urge you to be as supportive as possible of these people who are transporting your most precious cargo day in, day out, and to offer them some grace and some understanding, because nobody wants this situation, but we have it. And if you are dealing with that in your district on a regular basis, you really need to be sending a letter to state, because the only way that they're going to increase the number of bus drivers, aides, and monitors is going to be through things like increased wages.
Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit about in this morning's session that at one point one of the school districts, neighboring school districts in our county, had the National Guard transporting their students to school. That's how significant these shortages were at the time, just in this one district. Hard job, not a lot of money. Definitely show them respect. And
but do write to the state, because when issues like this occur, and there are other major issues, that are repercussions from the pandemic at the moment, for example, shortage of places in out of district placements, shortage of places in residential schools, and so on and so forth. The only way we're going to address those things is by parents and anybody else who has a stake in this writing to state.
Definitely.
Okay, and then the biggest and knottiest of problems, which is refusal to transport a child. I want to be clear here, we're not talking about a bus suspension here. We're talking about situations in which maybe the transportation company, for example, decides they're not going to transport a child. And this does happen. There is a case that you can find on YouTube at the moment of a mother in New York State. Her child is on a small special education bus with a monitor. When she was being seated, it looks like on the video she lashed out at the monitor and the monitor physically lashed out back at her. So obviously the mum filed a complaint. Who wouldn't in that situation? But now the transportation company, not the district, the transportation company is refusing to transport that child. That's a rare situation, but we would like you to know that there are actually reporting procedures in place so that if there are behavioral issues on the bus, that to and fro communication that we talked about at the very beginning of the webinar between the CSE office and the Office for Transportation and the district, or the CPSE office, should be taking place, and this should be monitored. There should be that ongoing communication. And if behaviors start to get problematic, then there should be an FBA. Or there should be some sort of investigation into what's prompting those behaviors and attempts to help the child manage those behaviors. And that may involve an FBA and an intervention plan. It may involve having a behaviorist come onto the bus. What I would like you to know, what we would like you to know, is that they do, regardless of the situation, have a burden of care. So there shouldn't really be any situations arising whereby a child just gets kicked off a bus abruptly. That is not going to happen. That child has to be basically the school is handing over that burden of care to the people transporting the child to your home, whereupon they are then passed into the care of the caregivers or parents. And there shouldn't be a lapse in that burden of care. That's what we wanted to say. Does anyone want to add anything on this? This is a difficult situation if anybody does find that there's a
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we have seen this, and there definitely has been a rise, at least in our work, here in this county, of students that have significant needs, and where students aren't getting that support on the bus and it's not working. And unfortunately, you know, in the worst case scenarios, this can result in the CSEs coming back together and saying that an alternative placement needs to be found. So it's really important that parents do advocate if there's problems, if there's issues of behavior, that they get on this and that they're calling meetings, program review meetings, they're contacting their CSE chair people and anyone that can help with putting together a plan to make sure that student can successfully be transported to and from school. So don't let it go. Don't be intimidated. Document. There's often recordings, right? There's videos on the bus. So it's really not a he says, she says. If there's a video running on that bus, you're entitled to see it. But most important, that child is entitled to have every intervention that possibly can be put into place. And if they have to change the transportation to one-to-one, adding an aide, adding a behavioralist, they have to do everything possible to give that child access to a free and appropriate public education. And as we said earlier, that starts with getting on that bus. That's the start of their school day. So don't give up, reach out for help from agencies like ours, and the others that are here today. Just
if
don't.
your alarm bells are ringing, no matter how small it may seem to you, I would say something. We had a situation with my eldest child who was in an out-of-district program. One of the reasons she ended up in that out-of-district program was because of bullying in her home district. And about a year into the program, one of the bullies was placed in the same program as her and was on the bus with her and continued to taunt her and cause problems to the point where it wasn't on the bus, but she had a physical reaction at the program and threw a trash can, and she got kicked out of the program. Had I known more about my rights at the time, I would have asked for separate transportation from the word go. I mean, I did try to advocate for the child not even coming into the program, because there were only 5 or 6 kids in that program, so she was forced to be with this kid day in, day out, and it really wasn't good. But yeah, any concerns, we want to really nip them in the bud. And moving on to that, we're talking about what parents can do. So observe your child when you are traveling around with them. We want, if you've got a very young child and we're coming up to school age, they haven't experienced transportation before, keep an eye on what's going on when they're in the car. If they are freaking out when a car honks going past them, if they're freaking out when a big loud truck is going past, if they have a tendency to try and undo the seatbelt in the back of the car, these are things you need to be sharing with the districts. They need that information. Renee alluded to this earlier. The most comprehensive picture of the child's needs is what everyone has to have if we're going to be successful in our attempts to support a child. So anything you know about how your child deals with long car journeys, transportation, going on buses, share it with the CSE committee. I think I just jumped ahead there. Yes, I did. Another thing you can do is use social stories to help your child understand what to expect. If you've not come across these before, they tend to be used a lot with children with autism, but I would say that they're equally useful with any child that has anxiety, children with ADHD, children with sensory issues. Give them as much information as possible before they start using that school bus so that they know what is going to be happening. That is going to reduce the likelihood of them freaking out and having anxiety or meltdowns on the bus.
So
Yeah,
Fiona, I just want to jump in
Yeah.
and say, not only for you to do it at home, but also in school. So just, I think kids need to be reminded before they get on the bus, because I really do think that, that kids just need that support. I call it wraparound support. So not just at home, because, they get it at home, they get on the bus, and then the whole day goes by. They've had a day full of a lot of stuff that they've just learned and done. But before they get back on the bus, just a helpful to read one of those social stories again, that could be built into any kind of plan when being transported on the bus. And again, just a heads up with that too, is also if there's field trips, any bus field trips that are going to be needed, that you want to be able to make sure to include that too, because kids, if they go on field trips, they might be on a different bus for that.
Very good point. You need to make connections with everybody involved in this process. So that's the transportation staff. We've talked about that already. Show appreciation of what they do. Don't treat them as a service. Introduce yourself at the beginning of the year. Check in with them. Let them know if your child has had a sleepless night, for example, and might be a bit tetchy on the bus. Do we use that word tetchy in America? Sorry if we don't. Bad-tempered. We were always highly appreciative of the people that drove our children to and from school. We tended to give them gifts whenever there was a holiday at the end of the school year, write them little notes, have our children write them notes, because you're relationship building there. And when we have a good working relationship, we're more likely to get positive outcomes. I'd also recommend in some instances connecting with the children of other parents who ride on the bus if that's possible. You may hear of things going on from that parent. If you have a child who's like mine were, and they would get off the bus and I'd say, how was your day? And they go, fine. and that's all I'm going to hear. Whereas another more chatty child may be able to fill you in a little bit more on what's been happening on that bus. The other reason to make connections with parents, I talked about this morning. One of my children had huge problems on the big elementary school bus. She was put on that bus, I think, because she's had high functioning autism. They didn't think that she particularly needed special transportation arrangements. And she was very badly bullied on that bus. And the way that we dealt with it was to actually, we found out that 2 children were being very supportive of her. And we reached out to those parents and said, we want to really thank you for the care that your children have shown towards our daughter. The other kids on the bus are bullying her. We really appreciate what they're doing. And that parent then went and spoke to other parents and spoke, and her children then influenced other children, and the bullying eased off as a result. So talking to people and making connections is really important. If your child can understand the school code of conduct, please teach them that it applies to school transportation as well. That is really important. And again, I will allude to children with autism and my children for whom school was school, the bus was the bus, and home was home. So 3 completely separate things. They need to understand that the behavioral expectations are the same on the bus as they are in school. And as parents, if you have children who stuff things into their bags and you don't know what's in their bags, you might want to be checking, because what you certainly don't want is a child who doesn't understand what they're doing taking a gun onto the bus, for example. A kind of funny example that I gave this morning is a child in England who became obsessed with beer bottles because the label on the beer bottle had his name sitting in the middle of it. I think it was Carlsberg and he was called Carl. And so he wanted to carry around a bottle of beer wherever he went, and he took one to school. So we need to be, in some instances, checking our children's bags because we don't want them falling afoul of that code of conduct without realizing what's happening. Anyone want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important because we work with families of students all the time that have suspensions because of conduct on the bus. And even if they're on a small bus, they can still be suspended. And again, it could be determined that it's a manifestation of their disability after 10 days of suspension, but they can still be suspended and removed from the bus. So it's a really important topic to really understand. And if your child needs help understanding how to behave and needs planning and some strategies, how to make it through that bus ride in the morning and in the afternoon, it's really important to address that because we do have quite a few students every year that are suspended from the bus. And a suspension or removal from the bus, even if it's for a short period of time, can really negatively impact the family because you may have to drive that student to school if they're not allowed to board that bus. So definitely address these issues, be proactive.
It's Renee again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have quite a number of kids that were suspended because of their behavior on the bus and all sorts of behavior. That's all I'm going to say. So it's, I do think again, and I think you mentioned at the beginning of this webinar that any kind of training that your child needs or part of it, you said if there needs to be a transportation goal for the student to reach that goal, because if they do have different behavior on that bus, then that means that they need to have some kind of supports and training inside of school as well, not just at home. But you can't, I think that whole suspension from the bus and then not allowing that child that restorative justice, well, this is what you did wrong. This is the video. This is what you did wrong. And this is the right way to talk to the bus aide, or if you're upset with another child, this is what you do. But that doesn't really happen. And that's the part where I think is really important, that how is that going to be resolved and addressed? So when your child is able to go back onto that bus, that they're supported and that they know what they're supposed to be doing or not doing. And that's the big
Yeah.
one too, not doing.
And it needs to be explicit as well, doesn't it?
Yes,
Because
specific, explicit, yes.
you're supposed to behave on the bus, you're supposed to sit quietly on the bus. That means different things to different people. So it needs, the instruction needs to be explicit, absolutely explicit.
And also
Um,
just for future,
mm.
right? Future transportation, like how do you behave on public transit as well, right? You know,
Yes,
what kind of
absolutely.
expectations are
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, because on public transport, they will get thrown off the bus as adults,
Mhm.
potentially. Another thing you can do as a parent, if you have one of those really intractable situations, or if you're that parent that had the child on the bus where the monitor physically responded to the child, you could request additional training. I think Jen alluded to the fact that the Anderson Center for Autism in Dutchess County offers autism-specific training. Just as, again, a preemptive thing, if your child has a specific set of needs and you find anything, any resources out there, share them with the CSE team and ask that they be shared with the staff on the bus. I came across a YouTube video about transporting students with disabilities who have emotional issues, for example, today. So there is stuff out there that you can share. There's also this organization called the National Association for Pupil Transportation, and they offer some fairly in-depth training. So as you can see, it consists of 8 classes, and they are classes where there is testing at the end of each class. They have to do these compulsory first 6 classes, and then they get a choice of 2 from a range of additional classes. And obviously this is going to be a lot more in-depth, I suspect, than the training that most personnel on student transportation are receiving as part of their regular training year in, year out. Finally, if you're in a really difficult situation, you have done everything you can, worked with the school, gone through various changes and different types of supports and accommodations, and still nothing is working, or you're in that situation where they're refusing to bus your child, then you can file a state complaint. Be explicit in the complaint about what your students' needs are, what the lack of provision is. Be very specific about that. Ordinarily my child needs to get a bus 20 miles from their home to this program. They have not been receiving the transportation now for 6 weeks. We have no information from the district about when transportation is going to resume, that kind of information. The impact it's having on your child's education, and again, be very explicit in your request for action. What is it you're looking for them to do? Are you looking for them to reach out to the school district and reinstate that right to transportation straight away, for example? The education laws and regulations relating to IEPs and therefore to special education transportation are governed by federal, state and local authorities. Most of the time you are going to, if you're reaching the point where you need to file a complaint, you're going to be reaching out to state. And this is the areas of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act documentation. These are the areas where you will find information relating specifically to transportation. And that's everything. You can reach out to Jennifer or I, or if you are in Ulster County, for example, you can reach out to Renee. And we will be sending a handout along with the evaluation that also contains our contact information, a little summary of what we've discussed today, and some useful links so that you can find out a little bit more about how all of this works, including links from the New York State Department for Education. Are there any questions?
You could just either put it in the chat if you have a question, or you can raise your hand, to a little virtual hand, or unmute yourself.
All right. quiet group tonight.
I have, I have a question.
Yeah.
Forgot what, oh, under the law, are they, is there video and audio on buses? The school district last year told me that they can video something, but that it's up to their discretion to erase it, and there's no audio involved with it. Is that the same when they transport kids going to a day treatment program in a different county? Or it's basically up to the transportation company that they farm out to?
That's a really good question, and I'll be honest, I do not know the answer to that. Does anybody else know?
So I know that it's not audio, it's visual
Hmm.
that they have. But I think that's a really good question to ask the head of transportation if they are using outside contractors
Mhm.
to ask what the rules are, like what they do. I tell parents all the time, and think about it, we've all been talking about it now, that, our precious children are being transported away by strangers, basically, that we're trusting, and we're hoping that they're trained and all that other stuff. And I got to tell you, I gave workshops to a lot of bus companies, and the majority of these people, they call the cargo that they said their kids. They call them their kids. They are very invested in these children, but yet you have a few bad apples. Obviously, every profession does, but when it involves a child getting suspended because of their behavior, it is important to right away ask for the video, because they do delete videos after a certain amount of time. They have to, because oh my gosh, they'd have an endless amount. Think about it. So that's why it's so important that some way, shape, or form, you're letting the transportation department know if there's an issue with your child on the bus, you want to call right away, so then you can put in writing. And I always like to say to everyone, you want a paper trail in writing that you want to know, hey, is there any video of this on the bus? Because sometimes that camera can't see certain stuff. However, you want an investigation. So that's when people are asking other people on the bus, and like Fiona talked about, other kids, other students being asked questions and getting the full report. So I don't know if that helped or not, but
Yeah, hi Libby. They
Hi.
should they should have some software that blurs out the other students. I've never heard of the audio piece, and it sounds somewhat suspect in a way if they're saying we don't have videos and they erase it immediately. That's a little strange. And I would think that most school districts that are contracting with a third party provider would make sure that they have some safety measures in place, and that would be, all the buses pretty much have recordings going. So I would definitely look into that a little more. And as Renee just said, time is of the essence, and getting your information and making sure that you contact the correct people.
Well, it's a little confusing because the transportation company is farmed out by BOCES, even though my grandson has nothing to do with BOCES. So it's like, do I go to special ed to speak to them, or initially, or the bus transportation company to get the rules and regs, or BOCES? Because my grandson, the first day of school, were never contacted. We didn't know what time, what bus number, and everything. It was just the girl got sick or something like that. It eventually worked itself out, but
Mhm.
it's very compartmentalized, and I'm not exactly sure who I should contact as far as, are there written rules and regulations? Is it going by the school district in special ed because they're sending him to a day program in Westchester? Or is it BOCES, or is it the actual bus company or the van company that's providing the service?
so what I would do, this is Renee, what I would do, and I've had parents do this, I've told them to do this here, you always want to involve your CSE director in your school district. Because
Okay.
I'll tell you right now, people don't know what they don't know. And it's a lot. So I would do an email to the school district of the director of special education, the head of transportation for your school district you live in. And then in that very nice email, just ask, who is it that is responsible, physically responsible for the transportation? What company for transporting your grandchild? And ask them to forward that and include you in that. And what your concerns are and all of that. Because again, you don't know, they don't know, and what they don't know. And I think it's important that you keep a paper trail of it and you let them know that that's happening, because I'm not going to, sometimes the left hand doesn't tell the right hand what's been going on and what they're doing. And it's just a brutal reality. And because people are human and we all make mistakes, but also nobody's ever really inquired about it and thought about it. And that's why it's so, and all my kids have graduated, but I remember just like thinking it's so overwhelming. And I had a child, my oldest, who's 30, that had a one-on-one nurse, and all totally dependent and all this other stuff. And to trust other people was really a huge thing on my part, and it's overwhelming. But when you make sure you keep a paper trail and you ask people, and I say, don't expect an answer the next day.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, but the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So in a nice way, hey, just want to make sure my email didn't get lost, and resend it or something like that. Yeah.
Okay,
Now,
can you, maybe you don't know the answer to it, but I plan to call CSE. I'm confused because I got a letter that they wanted my grandson's Chromebook back, okay? Because they consider him out of district. Yet that's his home, Hyde Park is his home district. And I had to re-register him before he could go to the day treatment program. So I'm very confused as of, they'll say, well, he's an out of district, he's not in our district anymore, but I had to re-register him in district when he came back to the school system this past summer from an RTF. So, here's the other thing. When I went to the day treatment program, they said, oh, it's good if he keeps his Chromebook, because God forbid there's another pandemic, he would have something. So now I'm very confused because I'm like, they're kind of like playing both sides. Is he in district? He's not out of district because they took the Chromebook back.
well, the Chromebook is going to be needed presumably for work he does at home as well as work that he does at school.
Well, they don't do any work at home it's just schoolwork. They're not given homework.
So is the Chromebook, does he utilize the Chromebook on the bus?
Oh, God, no.
Oh, no, I'm just asking. No. So,
Is
you
he
know,
using the Chromebook, Libby, in the program? Was he using the district's, see, the problem is sometimes some of that software that's on there and how it's set up. Does he have access to a Chromebook in his current RTF academic?
No, he's not in an art. He's in a day program
Day
school
now.
down in Westchester, but they don't send the kids home with a Chromebook or anything. They just do the work on the computer at school, and they don't give homework assignments to them on the weekend or at home.
Okay.
so he never uses the Chromebook at school, at the day program?
Yeah,
Yes, but it's their Chromebook down in Westchester. It's not the Chromebook from here in Hyde Park.
Oh, so I guess the district, if he's not using it, they want it back.
Yeah.
Okay, but
Yeah.
I'm just confused because once they say he's in district, you had to re-register him again, and now they're saying no, he's out of district. He's not. I don't know.
Well, that goes back to what Fiona was saying. I think the Hyde Park School District should have been explicit in what they were asking from you, to say specifically, if he's not utilizing it in Westchester because it's an out of district school and they're not using it, we want it back.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they could have been more
that's the
specific with you.
situation. Just
All right,
coming
Thank
back to your original question, Elizabeth, the New York State does require all school buses to have at least one video system,
Mhm.
and all school districts should have a policy for using that video system. So you should be able to find out what the policy is in terms of how that video information is stored, how long it's stored for, what it's used for, etc., etc.
But see, it's confusing because are they going by the Hyde Park School District, or are they going by what the transportation bus company, because they farm it out through BOCES. So I guess I can call the CSE and request the information.
Yeah, I mean, I would think if the district, you say it's farming out through BOCES, but it's the district that's responsible for the IEP.
Mhm,
So I would
It's
think
very
that
confusing.
it is.
mhm.
That would be my first port of call. I would call the district and say, you know, what is their policy on videos, and does it apply to the bus that your grandson is taking to his placement? And if not, who should you be talking to? Is it a BOCES bus, and therefore it's the BOCES policy that applies?
Okay, thank you. As you said, it's just a nice way and to start the paper trail and
Yeah,
make them aware that you're requesting this information. Thank you.
you're
Mhm.
welcome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Are there any
Lily,
more-
for coming.
Yeah, are there any more questions? I see some stuff in the chat. I'm just going to quickly check. Okay, that's all just to do with the
The
forms.
survey links, yeah.
Okay. If there are no more questions, it's 22 minutes past 8, so I think we will wrap up. We just want to make absolutely certain that we've covered everything. If you do think of something afterwards, you will have contact details in that email, or we will put you in touch with the Independent Living Centre in the county that you're in. So don't hold back. If you have more things that you want to find out and you want to reach out to us, please do so.
Right. Special thanks to our presenters. We really
Mhm.
appreciate everyone's assistance tonight. And like I said, we will send out a survey to folks. If you are interested in joining the Mid-Hudson Special Ed Task Force, we are always interested in adding on folks, family members, professionals. It certainly is very helpful to our task force to have more folks involved. So thank you again and have a great evening.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, everyone.
everyone.
Thank you,
Good night.
everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye,
Bye.
ladies.
Thank
Good
you.
night.